Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Begin.
We're live now.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Ma'wa Medhin. I am the co-founder and president of Tigray Action Committee, as well as United Women of the Horn. I am honored to be working with the Minnesota Institute of Horn of Africa Studies and welcoming you all to this timely discussion on promoting peace and transitional justice in the Horn of Africa. As we all know, the Horn has been plagued with recurring conflicts, socioeconomic and environmental disasters, and the collapsing of many governments. Conflicts such as the Somali-Ethiopia 1977 Ogaden War, the Ethiopia-Eritrea 1998 war, the Sudanese Civil War or the Darfur conflict, the tribal wars in Somalia, violent transitions and protests, dictatorships, and the ongoing crimes against humanity in Tigray, as Secretary Blinken stated yesterday during his press release of the 2022 reports on human rights practices. These wars and conflicts have resulted in a significant loss of life, livelihoods, and has stalled the growth of many, many nations. The Horn of Africa and its diverse people deserve to experience a period of stability, and as representatives from different backgrounds, it's imperative we all support each other and stand in solidarity with each other and collectively be an unwavering voice for peace. As the president of Tigray Action Committee and the United Women of the Horn, my mission is to make sure Tigray's women and girls are remembered and that all the women in and from the Horn of Africa are not only heard, but listened to and respected. For today's discussion, we reached out to multiple women who are experienced and knowledgeable in every topic we'll be covering, but unfortunately, due to scheduling conflicts, none were able to make it. Inclusivity of women is something I highly prioritize, and of course, I'm dismayed by the lack of representation of women and of Somaliland on this panel. Nonetheless, I am confident in how we will engage in this very important discussion. It is my honor as a Tigrayan to be engaged in communities from all over the Horn of Africa and the greater African continent. Our well-being, freedom, peace, and development are interdependent, and collectively we can achieve so much. Our aim for today's conversation is to cover the ongoing events directly affecting the Horn and promote peace and transitional justice efforts throughout East Africa. We'll highlight the fight against religious extremism, Somali's current events, inclusivity, democracy, the need for sustainable peace, and other pressing issues. We are going to begin. Our panelists today are Professor Ali Mohammed Gadey, former Prime Minister of Somalia. He was actually unable to join us today, but does send a message of support towards peaceful transitional justice efforts. Ambassador Ahmed Awad, who is the former Somali ambassador to the United States, as well as the former Foreign Minister of Somalia and Puntland presidential candidate. Ambassador Mike Hammer, who is the United States Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa. Abdi Mahmoud, who is the president at the Horn of Africa Community and humanitarian expert. Alex DeWall, who is an executive director of World Peace Foundation and a professor at Tufts University. Michael Fuchs, who is a representative at the Somali desk at the United States State Department. Our moderator today will be Hafsa Mohammed, who is the communications director for Minnesota Institute of Horn of Africa Studies. First, we're going to begin with Ambassador Mike Hammer, who is currently traveling.
Thank you very much, Mabel, and certainly Hafsa and Mohammed and the Minnesota Horn of Africa Institute for organizing this event. Just want to pick up on a couple of things that you said, Mabel, at the top. It is the reason that I have this job of a special envoy for the Horn of Africa that you outlined, that it drives U.S. foreign policy, which is to promote stability, development, and overall prosperity for the peoples in the Horn of Africa. And that's why this position was established at the beginning of the Biden administration, and I'm privileged to be able to try to advance our efforts, working with all those in the region who want to achieve a better future for all peoples in the Horn. Secondly, I appreciate very much your constant efforts to elevate in the voice of women and make sure they are heard. Maybe we can all agree that we won't go on panels unless there is a fair representation. Of course, we've got you, Mabel, and of course, Hafsa is moderating. But let's schedule it so that they can too participate. It's enough of the male voices; they've been heard for long enough, and it's a point that we make. In fact, Secretary Blinken made it in his public remarks here in Addis just a few days ago, and it's a point that our ambassador Tracy, who's a powerful woman, raises constantly here in Ethiopia, and our other ambassadors in the field. Let me just start just by saying that on this trip, and I didn't anticipate I would be on travel, so I am doing this literally from the side of a road. But I thought it was important to still, of course, follow through with this engagement and this invitation to discuss issues that are really critical to Somalia, to Somalis, also Ethiopians writ large, and others in the region. That we started the trip by going to the Emirates, then we proceeded on to Nairobi, Kenya, and then here we are in Addis, where the secretary was just last Wednesday and Thursday. In our travels, certainly one focus, and Mike Fuchs who's our colleague in the State Department on the Somalia desk, can elaborate more on our efforts to support President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed's efforts to bring an end to the al-Shabaab threat and to, of course, bring greater stability and prosperity to the Somali people. And very important part of the administration's effort is to coordinate all the different assistance that our partners are trying to provide in this very important moment in Somalia's history, where there is a great opportunity to make considerable progress. This was discussed certainly with the Emiratis, and was discussed with the Kenyans, and here as well in the meetings that Secretary Blinken had with both Prime Minister Abiy and the Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister Demeke Mekonnen. And so if we just focus a little bit on why I'm out here and why the Secretary came out, as you pointed out, he has made an effort to wanting to ensure that we follow through in supporting the African Union and the parties, that is the Tigrayan leadership and the government, in fully implementing the cessation of hostilities agreement. And in doing so, we've seen considerable progress. If you had asked me nearly 4.5 months ago, when we signed the agreement in Pretoria, that we'd be where we are today, I would have been pretty astonished in the sense that the guns were silenced quite immediately. Humanitarian assistance began to flow. It still needs to continue to flow at a larger scale, given the tremendous needs. The restoration of services has proceeded to pretty much pre-war levels, as far as we understand. Eritrean forces, for the most part, have pulled back to the border areas. There's still concerns about Amhara special forces in Fano in Western Tigray and Southern Tigray. But let's just focus on the positive, which is both parties in the meetings that the Secretary had reflected that they are fully committed to full implementation of the cessation of hostilities agreement. In part, I've stayed on here in Addis because we are understanding that on the verge of the establishment of the interim regional administration. We saw the selection of Getachew Reda as the president-elect. And so we anticipate in the coming days that will move forward, which is important because there needs to be governance and cooperation with the central government on issues relating to budget and running the region in a way that serves the people of Tigray. The Secretary was very clear that for the United States, it is very important that not only we support all the people of Ethiopia, and he announced 330 million additional monies in support of humanitarian efforts, which include also drought relief, which I know concerns, particularly people in Somali region in the south. But to ensure that we are providing support for all in the best way that we can. That also includes making sure that there isn't an escalation of conflict in Oromia, and that was one of the issues the Secretary talked about, and also encouraging that there be a peaceful resolution or dialogue to address some of the issues pertaining to Oromia. And then the last point I'll make, in order to sort of leave some time for at least a couple questions before I need to move on. And again, you have such a distinguished group of panelists that I know that it's going to be a very good and lively discussion. I would have liked to have listened to it in its entirety, but I have several of my staff members on who can then help inform us, because part of what I think is very important about my work is to listen, again, to all the different perspectives And you have, I'm sure, good ideas about how the United States can best contribute. I know you won't always agree. I don't expect that. But I do appreciate the spirit in which you make your recommendations. And in as much as the different diaspora groups can work together, I think that provides the best opportunity for making progress. But where there's still considerable effort that needs to be made is on accountability and on transitional justice. So as Mabel pointed out, the secretary just yesterday made an atrocities determination, which we felt was important in terms of our assessment of the facts of what happened during that horrific 2-year war, to ensure that those that have suffered so tremendously see that justice is done, and so that there's an opportunity to move forward and to heal and reconcile. These are processes, of course, that are incumbent upon the Ethiopian government, but we appreciate the commitments that are being made, and this was referenced by the secretary, the green paper that Justice Minister Gideon has done. We had colleagues from our Office of Global Criminal Justice that were participating in a transitional justice workshop, which I also had the good fortune to be able to attend for a bit. And the United States is offering any support in terms of expertise or funding that can be helpful in contributing to the transitional justice process that needs to take place. We've been speaking to the parties. Clearly, all those involved in the conflict committed war crimes, as the secretary indicated. That includes government of Ethiopia forces, it includes Amhara forces, it includes Tigrayan forces, and of course, Eritrean forces. And so we're calling upon all to ensure that those responsible for those war crimes are held accountable, or for more serious crimes against humanity. I seem to be losing my voice. I'm sorry about that. But let me just stop there. Maybe it's a signal that I should stop for a moment and
We've actually audio. Mr. Hammer.
to try to come up with solutions to the difficult currently on the Horn of Africa.
Thank you, Ambassador. We lost a bit of your audio for a little bit there, but we got the majority of it. And thank you so much for taking the time, especially while you're on the road. I think we can go ahead and get started. Hafsa, if you'd like to take over.
Thank you, Mabel, and thank you, Ambassador Mike. The first question that we have here is for Ambassador Ahmed Awad. Somalia has been battling religious extremist groups for a very long time. The question is, can Somalia defeat al-Shabaab and become an economically successful country with an incomplete constitution? And when will Somalia's constitution be finalized?
Thank you very much. And greetings to everyone, to all the participants. I see my friend Alex Dual, an expert on the region, glad to be on the same forum with him, and as others. Thanks for the Institute for organizing this. It's a timely one. To answer the question, yes, Shabab can be, or the menace of Shabab can be ended. And I think there is, as Ambassador Mike mentioned, there is an appreciable effort by the federal government and the communities in different regions, different states of Somalia to take the fight in a serious manner to al-Shabaab. That is a worthy effort and should be supported, and it should expedite the demise of al-Shabaab. This violent ideological, uncompromising, killers. Now, the other parts of the equation, which is related to the constitution and the economic viability. Of course, Somalia is a country that's rich in natural resources, and the Somali people are entrepreneurial. They're very creative people. It is the ingenuity and the entrepreneurship spirit of the Somali people that sustained Somali society throughout the years. However, we still suffer from the same political culture that brought us to here, which is one of bad governance at all levels, and the political culture that gives prominence and focuses on personality cult, the individual leaders, and doesn't give voice to the people, whether they are, including, of course, women, as you have rightly mentioned, and political culture that undermines institution maturity and strength of the state institutions. And as long as we have that challenge of governance and lack of responsive, accountable, effective institutions, then the likes of Al-Shabaab will try to fill the gap, and we will continue to lag behind other communities in economic development, in the participation of the people in their affairs. So those are the challenges. And the constitution, the reason that constitution cannot be completed is also related to that. Among other things, it's the absence of institutions that could support. It is this political culture that doesn't strive to build consensus, good governance, so that people will trust their state, and the legitimacy of the state is gained, and therefore the constitution can be finalized. As long as there is this mistrust in the government by the society, and the mistrust among the communities themselves, and the absence of state institutions that are responsive and accountable and that are representative, then we will, I'm afraid, continue to struggle to overcome or the weakness in our governance and the challenges of finalizing the constitutions and even fighting Al-Shabaab.
Thank you so much for the informative response, Ambassador Ahmed Awad. We're all aware neighboring countries under African Union mandates are operating throughout Somalia. Somali soldiers receive less pay, less recognition, and less support than their Amethyst counterparts. Do you truly, Abdi Mahmoud, I want to pass this question over to you. Do you truly believe inviting Amethyst, formerly known as Amazon troops, from Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, actually helps in the fight against Al-Shabaab? Or would you say effective and recently formed entities like the Mawisle should be supported and later integrated into the Somali National Army? And would you say that Mawisle have recently experienced serious setbacks in certain areas, with Al-Shabaab retaking towns and countless civilian casualties?
Thank you, Hafsa and Mohammed and the Minnesota Institute of Horn of African Studies for bringing together this timely discussion on issues of great importance to the Horn of Africa, and all of the participants that are contributing. So I'm glad to be a participant in this event. I think, we've we've seen since about 2007 when Ugandan troops first came into Somalia as peacekeepers. And, as of today, there's been a lot of ups and downs, and they've, at times they're, very positive contributors, and other times they're a hindrance. And, a lot of it also it goes along with the Somali government's willingness to put together an effective security forces to be able to take over a lot of the responsibilities, and that has been lacking. And I think the international community has been very generous to Somalis. There has been many attempts to train troops. We had troops sent to Uganda, Eritrea, Turkey, Ethiopia, and so as long as the security forces of the Somalis is not effective to take over, I think that it's really more of a, putting a bandage, over a wound. So you can bring in troops and it'll have positive, short-term positive effects, but I think in the long term, it's not really a solution. As far as the Ma'awislays, I don't think it can substitute the need for an effective Somali security force. And the challenge is that the areas that where the Ma'awislays are being formed were really areas that were very unstable to begin with. So if you give locals those kind of weapons with a lot of firepower, what's the long-term effect? And then I think it's going to be a disaster, because many of these groups, they have historical divisions. They just came through a lot of challenges within themselves, and the biggest challenge that is facing the Somali community is how to disarm. Many of these communities, there's a lot of instability because it's just awash with so many weapons that are everywhere, and just putting in a lot of weapons itself, I don't think it's going to solve the issue in the long term. It may be a positive short-term contribution, but as we've seen, some areas, Shabab, because they are well organized, they very retook some areas, but just bringing a lot of weapons into the area, I don't think is a solution. And the only solution is for there to be a competent Somali administration that is free from local politics of arming one group while denying another group and so forth. So Somalia has a long. It made some headways, and I think it's going in the right direction, more than actually people think. But it still has a ways to go, and security is still the #1 issue.
Thank you, Abdul Hamid. Professor Alex, you've been quite vocal about the many conflicts in Ethiopia, and particularly siege and genocide in Tigray. What are your views on Ethiopia's bid to prevent or end the work of International Commission of Human Rights experts from investigating the crimes against humanity, which are taking place in Tigray? And of course, I believe you probably have seen the Ministry of Foreign Affairs' recent statement in response to Senator Blinken's, Secretary Blinken's recent declaration of atrocities taking place in Tigray, and saying the Ethiopian government, the Eritrean forces, the Amhara forces, and so on, were behind those atrocities.
Thank you for inviting me. This is a terrific panel, and a lot of important topics are being raised. Let me start with Secretary Blinken's atrocities determination, and I think he got that absolutely right. I think all sides are responsible for war crimes. The Ethiopian National Defense Force, the Eritreans, are responsible for crimes against humanity in addition to war crimes, and the Amhara forces, and possibly others from Eritrea and the federal forces, are responsible for the crime against humanity ethnic cleansing, which is really a euphemism for genocide. And the first point that I want to make is I think that's the correct determination. The second is it's a shame that this determination was not made 1 year ago, when the information was already there. I think we can expect the government of Ethiopia and its allies to push back on that, of course. What I suspect we will see is the African Union also pushing back on that, which is something I find very shocking. The African Union emerged from a series of reflections by the African leadership some 25 years ago, and which led to the adoption of the principle of non-indifference to situations in which war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide were being perpetrated. And I first met Ambassador Ahmed in Darfur, where we were both working with the African Union, which had intervened in Darfur precisely on the basis of that principle, following the principle of non-indifference, was activating its institutions, including the Peace and Security Council, to initiate a whole range of responses to that, including a peacekeeping operation, including a peace process, including investigations into crimes, and including the African Union high-level panel. The African Union did none of those things. It actually abrogated its own norms, principles, and institutions in not referring the Tigray conflict to the Peace and Security Council. And it's actually, I'm quite shocked to see that even if you look at the website of the Peace and Security section of the African Union website, it does not affirm the primacy of the Peace and Security Council. It says, it puts it co-equal with the Commissioner, which is not correct. It's actually unlawful. But it has opened the door for the African Union to portray as an African solution a response to the conflict in Ethiopia, which is in flagrant violation of the African Union's norms, principles, and institutions, including its violation of the principle of non-indifference. And so I feel the question then goes in two directions. One is, what is the United States going to do next? And there's a whole lot of questions about accountability. There's a particular question, two particular questions that I want to highlight. One is what it is going to do about accountability for the crimes of pillage and destruction, for that very infrastructure that the United States provided to Tigray. So if you go to Mekelle, you will see infrastructure provided by US taxpayers through not only USAID, but through international financial institutions, which was dismantled and stolen by the Eritrean and Ethiopian forces. We wanted rebuilt, but those who destroyed it should not be rewarded. I think that is a fundamental principle, and I'm sure if Ambassador Hammer was still on, he would agree with that. So how is this going to be done independently of the authorities responsible for those crimes? A similar question arises with sexual and gender-based violence. There are tens of thousands of children born of rape. These are children of the state. They were born of a state policy of rape. And the idea that the material, psychological, and social burden of these children and their families should be borne by anyone else than the state of Ethiopia is outrageous in my view, and we should be ensuring that the state of Ethiopia and its senior officials do their utmost to provide the material, social, and other support to those victims, survivors of rape, especially those who are bringing up children that are unwanted children of that Ethiopian state. And then this responsibility also comes back to the African Union, which has shockingly, in my view, regressed from its norms and principles, and has a fundamental obligation. If it believes in African solutions, it should believe in the principles it solemnly adopted in the Constitutive Act, in the African Charter on Democracy, Governance, and Elections, and a whole host of other solemn commitments that it appears to have wished it had never signed in the first place. Thank you. Let me leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Alex. Those are two profound questions that hopefully maybe I can ask and maybe pass that question to Michael Fuchs, who's representing the State Department on this call, and also after maybe highlight some of the questions that I would like to also hear answered that Alex just asked. I'd like to also ask Michael Fuchs, with the Horn of Africa being one of the most strategic geopolitical areas, are there any new plans for the U.S. Government to shift their policies on Somalia and directly invest, in a larger way on, the workforce, natural resource developments, and maybe like what's the United States' current view on the, arms embargo and the lifting of it?
Sure. No, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to participate in this discussion. It's great to see some old friends also on on the panel. So the United States, I think, has what we like to call a whole of government approach to Somalia. Obviously, we are quite invested on the security front, including with the decision last year by President Biden to redeploy a few hundred U.S. forces to support Somali efforts against al-Shabaab. But we're also very invested on the economic development and humanitarian assistance side. We've got significant programming that goes to support small and medium business development opportunities. We have a number of good governance programs as well. We've supported electoral processes in Somalia as well as Somaliland over the years. We very much view stability in Somalia as not just an issue of addressing the security challenges from al-Shabaab. To some of the points that Ambassador Awad made earlier on, there really needs to be, I think, some fundamental political reconciliation that needs to take place. There needs to be reconciliation between and cooperation between the national level government and the federal member states. And we're very supportive of the efforts that the current administration is undertaking to expand dialogue and to address some of those issues, including related to fiscal federalism. There's just a National Consultative Council meeting that took place over the last few days where some of these issues were discussed. So we're very much supportive of all of those issues. In terms of the arms embargo, I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding of what the arms embargo actually is on Somalia. It's primarily an embargo on al-Shabaab and preventing al-Shabaab from being able to access weapons. There is a partial arms embargo still in place on the federal government of Somalia, which essentially requires the countries that want to supply weapons to follow a procedure for notifying when it is going to be providing certain types of weapons to the government, but there is a process by which the government can obtain access to weapons. We are very much supportive of ensuring that the federal government can get the weapons that it needs in order to advance security and stability in Somalia. They have made significant progress. I think one area where the international community has wanted to see more progress when it comes to fully lifting the arms embargo against the federal government is ensuring that it has the proper weapons and ammunition management procedures in place to ensure that the weapons that it does receive are controlled properly. The federal government has made some significant progress on that front in the last few years, and that resulted in some further steps just last November in easing the arms embargo. And the UN has laid out some benchmarks that once they are met, I think would enable the arms embargo to be lifted further. So again, I think from the United States perspective, we're very much committed to ensuring that the Somali government can get the weapons that it needs, and we're committed to supporting that process through the UN in coordination with the rest of the Security Council.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for your role at the Somalia desk. I appreciate your insight there. As a representative on this call, for taking place for Ambassador Mike Heimer, who dropped off, I wanted to circle back to what Alex asked before I go on to highlight what's happening in Las Anod with Ambassador Awad. When it comes to the countless children of rape, and also the infrastructure in places like Makala that the United States or American taxpayers built, and then what is the outlook of the State Department on that issue, or what are your thoughts?
Is the
Sorry,
question? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, are you asking about Las Anud or Megale?
To ask the question about Las Ano to Ambassador Awad, but just to circle back about the concept of U.S. taxpayers, the infrastructure that was destroyed in places like Makale, the rape and conflict-related sexual violence in places like Tigray. Are you able to provide any type of feedback or answer to that question of Alex, or?
So I would have to defer to my colleagues who work with Ambassador Hammer on those issues.
Okay, thank you for that response. All right, on Las Anod. So Ambassador Awad, Las Anod is a strategic town and what is known as it's a strategic town of Sol, Senag, and Ain SSC. It has been experiencing a level of indiscriminate shelling and violence, intertribe hate speech, field displacement of families, and caused instability. Some claim Somaliland is under attack by external entities, and verified reports highlight civilian casualties in the town of Las Anod. So Ambassador Awad, what is preventing Somaliland officials and the leadership in Las Anod from meeting and reaching a peaceful resolution to the ongoing violence? And is the international community not doing enough to support reconciliation efforts? And what is the role of maybe say Puntland and the central government in Somalia?
Well, there's so many, so much in that question. I'm not sure if we can address them all in the short window we have, but I think it's important to mention that, and this is precisely why the theme or the topic of this discussion is very important, timely, and relevant: promotion of peace and transitional justice. And it seems to me both goals or objectives have not been achieved in Somalia, and perhaps it needs to be achieved both in Ethiopia and in Somalia, and actually in the Horn of Africa. And the issues that are obtained in Las Ano or what's called SSC generally, the Sol, Senag, and Ain region are very complex. It is politically the region that is that connects Somalia, the Somaliland, to the rest of Somalia. There has been a dispute over whether SSC belongs to Somaliland, whether it belongs to Puntland, and by extension to Somalia, of which Puntland subscribes to. Those political issues could be dealt with given a good governance. I go back to the fundamental issues that I mentioned: good governance, and the importance or the focus on peace promotion, reconciliation, and building confidence among the different communities. But the current crisis are inexcusable. We can deal with the political issues. Somaliland could claim that Sol and Senag belongs to it. A good number of the, if not majority of the people of that region would want it to be part of Somalia. Some of them were party in the administration of Somaliland, others in the administration of Puntland. Of course, they are representing the federal government. But what happened lately in Las Ano is inexcusable and unjustifiable. it's the killing of innocent civilians by the Somaliland administration, the bombarding of Las Ano, the displacement, the massive displacement caused by this fight. So I think, and the role of the international community. Well, this is first of all, it's a recent, events. It is still its ramifications are yet to be determined and realized. I think there are efforts by Ethiopia, as far as I know, and by others to bring the parties to the conflict together. But I think there should be a stance by everyone, by the international community, by the Somali people everywhere, to oppose the killing and mayhem that is caused to Las Ano and to any part of Somalia. Because if that continues, then it will make the possibility of reconciliation among the communities and resolution to the political conflict much more difficult. So the best approach is to prevail over the administration of Somaliland to heed to the calls even within Somaliland itself to withdraw forces from Las Ano. I appreciate, I welcome the declaration that of cessation of hostilities or what you call it, but as long as the forces are how do you say it, bombarding Las Ano and killing civilians, the conflict will spread, and it may encompass much more than Las Ano and Sol and Senag and Ain, and we don't need that. We don't need Somalia to go back to large-scale civil war and violence and mayhem and killing of innocent people on either side of the conflict.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ahmed Awad. A couple of days ago, Abiy Ahmed presented a version, I believe version 2 of his book, Medefmed, I believe it's called. While presenting the book to Somali region's Mustafa Omar, Abiy made a very controversial remark about proceeds from his book being utilized for building monuments for Ethiopian soldiers who were killed in the Ogaden, Somalia, Ethiopian, 1977 war. These monuments would be commemorating, I believe, Ethiopian soldiers and not, I guess, ethnic Somalis from both sides of the border who were essentially fighting for freedom. So, Abdi Mahmoud, do you think we will see such statues on, the historical Karamada Mountains under Mustafa's leadership? And is that possible?
Thanks for the question, Hafsa. Generally there's very little appreciation in successive Ethiopian governments for the plight and the suffering, the historical suffering of the ethnic Somalis in Ethiopia. I myself, I am a direct refugee from that exact same war. A place that's maybe like 60 miles from the Karamorda mountains on the outskirts of Jigjiga, and it's really a history that is very painful to Somalis. It was a time where it was almost a crime to be a Somali. I remember a time when a local Somali man was detained by the local forces, and they found a piece of paper in his pocket where it was a piece of paper that had his name on it in Somali. And he got a 7-year sentence for having a piece of letter with his name in Somali. So those are the injustices that we've suffered. And I think that there's a lot of negligence on the part of the Abiy government since he came to power. I think there's been a lot of improvements in human rights, but I think that the indifferences and the negligence of the ethnic Somalis, I think it continues. It also highlights the people that are selected to represent us in the federal government. The equality. I think it's also an issue that's there, but I think this is an issue that's mainly usually raised by far right Ethiopian groups, and I think that for the prime minister to kind of carry that on, I don't think it serves him well because there's two sides of the of the coin. There's about 2 years ago, this was like a really hot issue, and many local political leaders, they came out against it, soundly. And I remember a time when the Ethiopian national TV was going around Addis, and they were asking people about this same exact issue. And I remember a young man, an Ethiopian, a young man who's certainly not a Somali, he said that, if this is an issue that divides Ethiopians, I think it should be left alone. And I feel, the same way. So as far as monuments being erected during Mustafa's tenure, I think I'm not sure that's going to, this issue always comes up, but I don't think it's going to happen, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Thank you very much, Abdi Mahmoud. Yes, there's a lot of responses and feedback from Somali communities throughout the Horn of Africa and also in the diaspora about the possibility of monuments, but I've been seeing it on social media, a lot of people going to the mountain of Karamada and taking pictures and saying it's not possible, to have monuments commemorating Ethiopian soldiers rather than Somali soldiers. I want to go over to Alex and ask about, there have been recent protests in Kenya. I'm sure if you've been following. What are your views on those current protests taking place under Ruto's new administration? And also, of course, the interim administration that was just formed in Tigray, and what's happening overall? How does that impact, other nationalities throughout Ethiopia and also in Somalia? Are we going to be seeing new shifts? Are we going to be seeing, new forms of or attempts towards representative democracy? What are your overall views?
On the Kenyan situation, I'm not really in a position to comment. I think that would be better directed to one of the other panelists here. On Ethiopia as a whole, let me step back. Let me give a more sort of general overview. And the key point I want to make is this, which is that for a long time, Ethiopians have considered Ethiopia to be exceptional, Ethiopia to be an exceptional state with a long history and a robustness of statehood and identity. And in the last 20 years, or in the first 20 years of this century, Ethiopians also felt that the prosperity that was coming to them because with this remarkably rapid growth was also something that was not only exceptional, but something to which they were sort of automatically entitled. And what we have seen in the last few years of the prime ministership of Abiy Ahmed is that both exceptionalisms are now consigned to history. Ethiopians have come to realize that their state actually resembles, in most respects, an archetypical large African country that is unable to hold itself together. It looks a bit like DR Congo, or Nigeria without the oil, or in best case something like Cameroon. It is actually that the politics of Ethiopia are the politics of the belly, as the French Africanist Jean-Francois Bayard would have described it. Politics of transactionalism, of posturing, of patronage, deceit, etc., showing one face to the international community, another face internally, always shifting, very tactical. And frankly, I think it's going to be very difficult for many Ethiopians to realize that their country is not that different from, let's say, DR Congo or Central African Republic. And the prosperity that they had taken for granted, this younger generation of Ethiopians, because they're grown up in a situation where, year on year, you could actually see in the towns, in the villages of Ethiopia, you could see growth. That is now history. We have now a government that will be managing its finances much in the same way as the archetypical African government manages its finances, which is to stay in power. And Ethiopia was liked by aid donors because you could be confident that money given to Ethiopia, yes, some of it would be, a small amount perhaps would be creamed off the top, but the road would be built. The infrastructure would be built, the health services would be delivered. No longer. It's now, as I say, like DRC or like Angola, and therefore I think it's going to take some while for Ethiopians to adjust to this new reality, and for them to realize that the hope of a transition to democratic, prosperous, exceptional country is not happening, and that they're going to have to do a lot more basic sort of political work in order to achieve stability in their country.
Thank you, Professor Alex. Since we're reaching our time limit soon, I wanted to go back to Ambassador Ahmed Awad with two combined questions. One is, of course, in 2018, the Horn of Africa experienced a large shift with the disarming of the Ogaden National Liberation Front, the unexpected normalization of relations with Eritrea, which is, of course, a country known to have been repeatedly accused of and proven to have trained al-Shabaab fighters. So, Ambassador Ahmed Awad, you were there, in 2018, I believe. What was the 2018 agreement between former President Farmajo Abiy Isais? What was that about? And also, what are your expectations as a current, candidate, I believe, for Puntland presidency and someone who's very senior in Somali politics? What are your aspirations and visions of peace in the Horn of Africa, and particularly the country of Somalia? We can't hear you, Ambassador Ahmed. Please unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Thanks, Hausa, for these important questions. Well, there was no agreement, the proper understanding of agreement between Somalia, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. At best, there was a memorandum of understanding for cooperation. And that was premised on the hope and expectation, at least as far as I understood it, of creating a more Horn of Africa closer cooperation that included all the Horn of African interests. This came, I think the initial idea was from the Somali government because all the, at least a good number of the Horn of African countries, i.e. Ethiopia, Kenya, Djibouti, all have elements of the Somali society, or their regions populated by the Somali people. So the region was inching towards cooperation, and the dividend of peace and normalization and kind of overcoming the historical animosity. Somalis thought that we could have Horn of Africa that is cooperating, that's closer, that has open border, and that and the international community was helping. We were even contemplating of interstate projects like the European Union and the World Bank was suggesting. This was also expedited by the hopeful or the euphoria that followed the election or selection of Abiy, Prime Minister Abiy, and Abiy's promise of a new era of openness in Ethiopia and openness of Ethiopia to the rest of the neighboring countries. So, but I think the leaders saw that maybe the first step was to start with Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. At least that was my understanding. And then to expand that to Djibouti and Sudan and Kenya. It is my understanding that that project has failed because Eritrea didn't want, perhaps was not of the same thought as the Somali government. The nature of the Eritrean regime perhaps was not conducive to openness, and therefore however they perhaps preferred to confine this into Somalia and Ethiopia and Eritrea. In hindsight, and when you see the war in Eritrea, it seems to me that one could think that perhaps Ethiopia and Eritrea had also other ideas. But we were really enthusiastic about regional cooperation and the region opening up to each other, at least in Somalia. That was our hope. Of course, there was a benefit for Somalia from that cooperation, that limited cooperation. Somalis were trained, Somali forces were trained in Eritrea, and they could play now a role in the fight against Shabab. The perpetual conflict between Ethiopia and Somalia was also decreasing. So those are my understanding while I was there. Now, I tend to be, even though the situation in some pockets of the region, like it was discussed here, the conflict on Tigray, the small conflict that we mentioned, it small in the sense of at least confined to Lasano and the bloodshed there. Some still challenge of governance in the whole region. Notwithstanding these things, I tend to be optimistic, having witnessed it a much more worse times in the past. I'm still hopeful that the region will if its leadership, political leadership, its intellectuals, community, society at large, work hard towards peace and cooperation and non-violence. I think we tend to move forward into cooperation. Look at ECOWAS, SADC. These were the models that we wanted to emulate in the Horn of Africa. And anyway, the whole Africa is moving towards, after the signing of the Africa free trade zone of, continental free movement of people and goods, then we thought this would expedite at least a regional cooperation, if not across the board, but in Africa. So I'm hopeful, but the challenges are big and huge. I go back to the point that I say, if the governance aspect, all these issues we are talking about, conflict, economic backwardness, all these things are symptoms of a disease that we have seen in Africa and the rest of the world, where good governance is established, then the situation of the people improve. The relations between countries, neighboring countries, also improve. But if, as Alexei would have it, we continue on this, what do you call it, belly politics, transactional politics, then we will remain in this situation, and perhaps we are very slow in learning from history, from the past history, because we have been there, and we haven't gained much from this political culture. It's time that we try to look at our situation seriously in Africa. Yeah, so I'm hopeful. That's why, by the way, I'm aspiring to play a role, so that we can bring a different political culture, one that is that emphasizes institutions rather than individuals, one that emphasizes cooperation and understanding and tolerance rather than conflict and and zero-sum game politics and undermining others within Somalia and Somalia and the rest of the neighboring countries. By the way, you mentioned it, the cohesion of the demonstrations in Kenya. Kenya is a bright spot in the Horn of Africa. It seems to me the Kenyan people are mature. Demonstrations, of course, have been even in the most advanced democracies, but I'm hopeful that the Kenyan political disagreements over the last election and demonstrations will not deteriorate to undermine the reputation that Kenya has gained, which is one of democratic governance, and at least to compare it to its neighbors, it's doing very, very well.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. This has been a productive and meaningful discussion. Before handing it over to our main organizer, Mabel Gebremedin, to conclude this program, I'd like to request each participant to take about a minute, maybe less than a minute, to have a closing message on transitional justice and peace for the entire Horn of Africa. And I'd like to, on my part, say a happy early Ramadan Mubarak. So I'll start off with maybe Alex for a closing statement.
Thank you, and early Ramadan Kareem to all of you who will be fasting. Transitional justice is never going to be easy. Those in power will reject it and continue to reject it. And it is a matter which the citizenry and the diaspora and all those who believe in justice must just hang on to, must just campaign on, must just not let go. That is my sole message. Thank you.
Abdi Mahmoud.
Oh, thanks everyone. Peace and justice is something that we certainly we all strive for. It is an issue that is paramount to the people of Horn of Africa, whether it's in Somalia, Ethiopia, or Eritrea. And and it's these principles, I think, that in the long term will be able to afford our people a better life. And I'd like to just add in, in the coming, just make the announcement that as far as the Somali region, where I hail from, there is certainly a need, for good governance. That's something that has been wholeheartedly been lacking in the past 5 years, and we've been really rattled and saddled with the one of the most least effective administrations that we've ever seen, and political leaders and traditional elders, and they've all called for a change. And I think there's a negligence that's going on in the federal government in not adhering to the wishes of the Somali region and its people. And I think that the Abiy government is hemorrhaging a lot of support within the Somali ethnic community, who in the beginning welcomed him with open arms, and now are taking a more of pessimistic view about his administration and where it's headed. I will just leave it there.
Thank you, Abdi. And then once again, Ambassador Awad for closing remarks on peace and transitional justice.
Thank you, Hafsa. Ramadan Kareem to you, and Alex and Abdi and Gabr. I'm sorry if I cannot pronounce the name. And I thank the institute that organized this. It was a fruitful discussion, I hope. Hafsa, your moderation was impeccable. Thank you very much. The questions raised. I think I said already, if we don't focus on, transitional justice and promotion of peace are all important in our part of the world, and we need it. But we need to have the conduit or the foundation for that to be successful, and that is effective institutions and good governance. Because transitional justice and promotion of peace and peace building and confidence building can only take place either by enlightened leadership, as was the case in South Africa, with the leadership of Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, the Truth and Commission, or strong characters but well-meaning like Paul Kagame in Rwanda. Unless you have such visionary individuals, you need to have state institutions to facilitate these processes. In the absence of that, and in the anarchic, conflictual situation that is prevailing in Somalia, in Ethiopia, not to mention Eritrea, it will be a challenge. We could attempt maybe at the society level, but it could be maximized if there were state institutions that are sponsoring these efforts and leaders that are committed to these processes. I think I take more than my 1 minute. Thank you very much, Hafsa, and good evening. It's evening for us in Nairobi to everyone. Bye, Alexi.
Mabel, if you want to close off the program for us, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hafsa. I just want to thank the Institute, our moderator, Hafsa, who did an amazing job today, to all of our panelists and to the many viewers and media outlets who are streaming this program currently. Peace, stability, and transitional justice are things that we are all working towards. We understand that these goals are only achievable through true accountability and justice. Let us all do our part. And again, I just want to say thank you and happy Ramadan to everyone, as well as happy Tzom to everybody that's taking part during this fasting season. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Glad to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you.